Hello, hello. Welcome back, or welcome if you're new here. My name is Alex, and I usually suck at introducing myself, but now I remembered. I'm a PhD candidate at the Faculty of Social Sciences, and I mostly talk about books that I read for my PhD, but also books for pleasure. And I know that this is like I don't know if lighting is going to be okay or sound if it might be too echoey or I don't know. We are doing this for a third time. I already tried to record myself two times, but I was interrupted nonetheless by a little cat. She obviously, in this particular moment, needed all of my attention of all the hours of the day. So now the little menace is outside on the balcony sleeping, and I can record myself. I found finally like a little angle where I have the white background and I can record myself. So I am here today to talk to you about a book, Paradise Built in Hell by Rebecca Solnit. I am using her work for my PhD. I will be having probably in my literature review some aspects from this book that she wrote. And when I was reading it, I was like, this has David Graeber written all over it. And I thought it was very interesting how to see the influence on her work and how she also influenced his work, because he mentions her in some of his books as well. And the last publication, which was the collection of his essays, she has written the foreword to that publication as well. So they were friends, obviously, and it's very interesting to see influence on each other in their work. So this book is about disasters. She is choosing specific natural disasters and non-natural disasters to analyze how disasters affect the communities and what is the reaction of the communities. Mostly she's focused on solidarity organizing and mutual aid that happens in the moment of disasters, bottom up. And also she's critiquing how very frequently the institutions, the states react in these moments and how different contexts shapes the reaction. She also talks a lot about how specific disasters might have this solidarity organizing, while others not as much. She gives only one example of this specific, I think it was like a chemical leak that happened in a town, and how actually the government, it was necessary for the people to self-isolate, to remain indoors, and how this has actually affected them. And therefore, there was no bottom-up organizing, but rather the state has taken upon itself to kind of contain the chemical contamination that happened through this disaster. So at the same time, she is also trying to break away the stereotypes that are surrounding the disaster, namely this persistent media reporting on mob rule, looting, and so on. And she's explaining why this quote-unquote looting happen, and how very frequently this is not like looting for the sake of looting, but this is people who have been affected and who are in immediacy of certain supplies like food, medicine, and clothing, and how very frequently this is done out of necessity, not out of greed for a material gain. She gives several examples. She's analyzing the earthquake that happened in San Francisco in 1906. She's analyzing 9/11. She also has earthquake in Mexico that happened in the 80s. There are several, Hurricane Katrina as well. Those are two segments of the book that are dedicated to Hurricane Katrina. And she's kind of drawing parallels and making distinctions between these disasters and what has caused certain reaction in particular time. And she is also trying to point out how the disasters can lead to further societal transformation, in particular in the context of the Mexico. When the earthquake occurred, it was a sort of a very visible political awakening for many people that led to civil society organizing, because the people who were affected by the earthquake, they required assistance from the state, of course, to dig through the ruins of the buildings and houses for their relatives and friends. Meanwhile, the state facilitated the capitalist owners of factories in that area where the earthquake occurred to dig out their machines. So for a lot of women in particular who were employed in these factories, because they were sewing factories, this was an awakening moment, and they started to organize in syndicates and protest. And also the earthquake itself revealed the corruptive institutions in facilitating the building of buildings that were not built according to the standards that were needed so they would withstand the earthquake that occurred, or that the damages would be at a minimal level. So it revealed another layer of the systemic corruption and why so many people actually died, simply because the codes for building these buildings were not followed, and there was, of course, the leniency of those who were in charge to check these things. They were probably participating. They are state agents and state agencies that are actively participating in enabling this kind of construction to go on. I'm going to put the book down because my hand is hurting. I also need a sip of coffee because my throat is dry. I thought the book was very well written. For me, it was very informative and eye-opening, in particular to the case of Katrina, simply because I was, I think, in my late teens or early 20s when this occurred. And I just remembered like brief reporting on the news in Serbia. And at the time, I wasn't really following US politics and wasn't really interested in what was going on in US. Like you would get like brief snippets here and there. But I wasn't very informed about the context or history, and in particular in the context of Hurricane Katrina, how it was disproportionately affecting the African American population in New Orleans, and how most of the areas that were flooded were actually the poorest parts of the city. And of course, what happened after that, that you had massive vigilantism that was organized by the local white population, who were obviously, it was racially motivated. So they were going around and killing civilians who were just simply trying to survive this disaster. And yeah, it was very interesting to see also how the state decided to react to it, and this is very common. She addresses this Also, in the case of San Francisco, how very frequently the state is just sending like the military or the police. In the case of Katrina and New Orleans, it was also mercenaries who were there. She mentions Jeremy Scahill, and he's reporting on this particular aspect because the mercenary organization or a firm that was hired is called Blackwater, and they were actually hired also in wars in Iraq and I think in Afghanistan. So you have this group of people who are equipped with weapons, who are coming not to essentially aid the local population, but to keep them, quote unquote, under control. And many people died because of this. They were shot at. They also died. The number of casualties wouldn't be as high if the people received the necessary aid and evacuation at the time. Many of them were completely isolated and were not allowed to leave certain areas. And of course, in those conditions, when you have that level of heat and, water everywhere that has flooded probably half or even more than half of the city, with dead bodies floating around, disease is rampant, and it's going to affect more people. And of course, usually the most vulnerable in the population, those are the people with, children, elderly, and so on. So we have a clear misconduct of the government, how they handle this. But one of the things that came out was the solidarity organizing. But what mattered in the aftermath of Katrina was that this didn't happen right away, simply because people weren't allowed to get into New Orleans, not even news reporters. And she even gives an example of a Fox News anchor who was not allowed, and there's like a video of him arguing, I think, with the police or a National Guard officer, and he's just like yelling, like saying like, you can't go in, you can't go out. People are just stranded and they were just left to die. And it was really devastating to read that. I finished it last night and I was not a happy person after finishing it. But the book also gives you some hope, and I really felt hopeful that, despite all of these ways that the state institutions might try to pin us against each other, and media plays a huge role in this. She writes a lot about that, how particular images are chosen, how a particular angle to the story is chosen, and how this creates misinformation. And she's saying in the case of Katrina in particular, this has affected the way the local police was reacting, because they were reacting based on the official information that was given to them through the media and their superiors. And this is also where you see how bureaucratic institutionalization fails, because very frequently you are not able to respond as quickly as you need to in these moments because of bureaucratic hurdles. And that's where the bottom-up organizing is crucial in the moments of disaster, where people who have survived it, they are on the ground, they can see what is needed, and they are able to organize among themselves. And she's basically breaking this stereotype that we live in this Hobbesian world, each person for themselves, this sort of neoliberal individualism. And she's saying most people are not that way. Most people are just going to try and assist and help each other as much as they can. Of course, you will have certain opportunism, like a form of not solidarity reacting by certain individuals, but that is a minority of the people. And the quote-unquote looting that happens, it doesn't happen because, people want to get rich in this moment and have some material gain, but rather because they need certain material things in order to survive. I thought the book was brilliant, even though it took me so long to read it. I felt that she addresses in detail a lot of the aspects that come out of disasters, and she's very good at kind of reflecting on her analysis and discourses that she has put in it. And in the preface to this edition, she has questions where she asks, why didn't it last? Why doesn't this self-organizing, motivated by solidarity, mutual aid, and just love for life doesn't last and doesn't lead to more transformation in society? And of course, sometimes it does happen. But like Angela Davis says, freedom is a constant struggle. And in those moments, very frequently, the voices that remain the loudest are the conservatives that are pushing us back to this like preservation of the current system that we have. And I've also seen this in my own research. So yeah, that's a book that I read and wanted to talk to you about. The second topic of this video is going to be a little reflection on this current quote-unquote scandal that I read about yesterday that happened in Britain. It's related to the Cambridge University regarding this one professor, an academic, who was apparently discovered to have plagiarized and lied about many aspects of his life. And I am really disappointed in the way the mainstream media is picking up this story, and that they are actually not using, I shouldn't be surprised at this point, but I am disappointed that they are not using this to kind of critique the academia overall. Of course, the main focus is on the racial aspect, the identity of the man. His name is, I'm so sorry, I forgot. I'm so bad with names. Jason Arday. I don't know who he is before this. I've never heard of him before, but apparently this has been an issue that one of the academics has been trying to draw the media's attention to, and the institutional attention to it. And apparently it turns out that he's, he calls himself race realist. We know what that means in reality. But why I wanted to talk about this is someone who works in academia. I think this story is crucial to kind of pinpoint what has happened to academia in the last 50 years. I am personally quite enraged by the level of corruption, nepotism that exists in academia, and nothing can guarantee your employment upon finishing your PhD. And also this kind of factory production of PhDs that is happening in academia. Even people who are not really interested in pursuing academic careers, but for some personal, form of fulfillment or ego boosting, they want to have the "dada" attached to their name. And this is another issue, but my main pet peeve in this moment is actually how normalized it is for PhD candidates to write articles that their senior colleagues attach their names to. This is a very common practice, and I've tried to have this conversation with several colleagues of mine who have been put in this position. And there is this level of normalization that irks me. Of course, I'm not blaming my colleagues who are simply trying to survive, because they are they are of course hierarchically placed on the bottom as PhD candidates, and we are very kind of looked down upon by our older colleagues. This was my first experience also in the first 6 months at the faculty. Like your PhD is seen as like this, just kind of, you're gonna finish it. Like, you'll see when you're done with it. It's not considered serious work. Of course, not every senior colleague sees it that way, but there are particular individuals who are in certain positions of power who see it that way. And this is I'm speaking from my own personal experience. And I had multiple conversations with friends and colleagues on this topic. I even wrote on my Patreon, in a moment of rage, this very short reflection on things that were happening at the time. I will link my Patreon below, and if you're interested, you can read it. Of course, this is nothing new that I'm reflecting on. Numerous books have been written about this, and I quote Sara Ahmed in my reflection as well. And there is a really good book called Dark Academia by Peter Fleming. He addresses these systemic issues. And at one point he addresses also, there is one specific chapter dedicated, I think it's called something like Star Academics, the chapter in the book, where he's talking about these individualized star academics and how they rise up and they become very kind of known in the public eye. The media is also, of course, picking them up and promoting them. And I am relating this to the current issue at hand regarding this professor at Cambridge. Everybody is like, why did the university, or why did the administration of Cambridge allow this to go on for such a long time? And the reason is money, of course, because when you have prominent scholars who are in some way tokenized for various reasons or have a certain level of success, this can, the institution is going to use everything that they can to promote this individual, because this will bring more funding for particular research. And we see this also in natural sciences. So in essence, the system itself is capitalist. Of course, academia is deeply embedded within the capitalist system, and what research you get to do is based on that. There is also a focus and this sort of emphasis on the quantitative research. Of course, quantitative research is held in a higher esteem than qualitative research. There is also perpetuation of being objective researchers still in some institutions, not in my own department, because my own department is set that way where there is constant reflection on this sort, quote-unquote, objectivity that you as a academic and a social scientist are supposed to have, or natural scientist. You can't be objective, and this is something that has been addressed by particular academics, and in last decades is something that has been kind of reflected, especially by scholars from decolonial perspective discourse. They are addressing this positionality within the academia that you have for your research. What is your position as a scientist while you are doing your research? How your research is affected, of course, by your biases in some way, but you can't control all of it, but you're going to do your best. And this is something that needs to be addressed also when you're writing the paper based on the research that conducted. For example, in my own case, I'm going to be writing extensively how my ethnographic research was heavily affected by my gender. And that's something that I kind of like had an inkling before I started, but didn't realize the magnitude that my gender is going to have on the results that I will get for my research. And of course, this is something I cannot change. Like, I am a woman and I'm perceived in particular way in certain communities, and it might be an advantage in some aspects, but also it can be a disadvantage. So it will definitely color the results of my own research, not because I'm going to be particularly heavily focused on it, but just simply because my gender affects the way people perceive me, the things that they are willing to reveal to me or not reveal to me, and how they speak to me in certain aspects and how they don't speak to me. Like, it's very nuanced, it's very complex, but these sort of conversations, you're not allowed in some spaces to have them. There are, of course, spaces where you can have them freely, but there are others that just simply don't allow these conversations. And I think what this case in particular reveals is the deeper structural problems inside academia, and how academia is unwilling to address these problems simply because it's going to affect pockets of many people. And instead of focusing on that, the reporting that I've seen in the UK mainstream media, I was watching LBC yesterday, James O'Brien, of course, he's a liberal, but, I wanted to see perspective. They're focusing on this, like, individual aspect of his personality. How does one person push this far the lies that they have created? Like, why do they do it? This kind of like focus, instead of asking deeper questions that are related to the structural system. I mean, he had some colleagues of his come and talk about, there was this one woman, I think she is from India, and she's an academic, and she was saying when she completed her PhD, she sent 60 applications for a position, for different positions, like 60 applications. Can you imagine applying, like, in a small period of time, 60 different positions? And of course, academia is extremely precarious. This is something that it's not talked about, especially here in Slovenia. Most of the academics are financed through research centers and research that you do in research centers. There are, of course, those who also teach, but this is very difficult to get that position, a teaching position. And usually you do like 50-50, like teaching and research, or you do some kind of like percentage split between those two. But of course, you have to be offered a position to be able to do that. And a lot of us don't even get that chance. And very frequently what happens when you are applying for particular calls that they have at certain institutions, they already know who they're going to hire. They're just doing this legal obligation. So they are legally obliged to put out a call for a position that they have and to conduct interviews. And then, they do this, but even before they put out the call, they already know who they're going to employ. So you have these like legal loopholes that obviously a lot of academics, are just using in order to employ, I don't know, friends or family or whoever. In my own case, my own mentor put up a call and we had interviews. I didn't really think I was gonna get the position, and I did get it in the end, and I was quite surprised. It was also a super funny story because at the time my Slovene was non-existent. I was doing a master thesis in English, and I wasn't really interested in learning the language because I wanted to do a PhD somewhere where I found calls that offered scholarships or some form of payment. And when that opportunity arose here in Slovenia, there were two positions in two different research centers. One of them was a center for journalism, but it required a knowledge of Slovene because your PhD was attached to some research project that they had, and it was connected to some kind of a history of journalism in Slovenia, and you would have to dig through the archives and, of course, conduct interviews with journalists. So I wasn't equipped for that, even though I was willing to learn the language, but it was just the time span that when that needed to occur, and my own knowledge pursuit of Slovene was not just gonna match, and it was gonna be a mess. And of course they saw that, so I didn't get the position. But yeah, I was accepted for this second position that I applied, and I was quite surprised. I got an email in Slovene, and I didn't know, like, I was like, what is this administrative thing that they are pestering me with again, because I was finishing my master thesis, and there was a lot of this like bureaucratic things that you needed to do on the website of the university, and I was just so annoyed with it. I hate bureaucracy as someone who has spent her whole conscious life doing bureaucratic work, even as a child, because I was a refugee and I had a status of a refugee. I was always put through particular bureaucratic motions that, and later as a migrant, when you're applying for visas and residency permits, it's really gruesome and grueling, the migration systems in the countries where I lived, and it was just not a pleasant experience. So every time I'm requested to do any kind of bureaucratic work, I'm just rolling my eyes and sighing and just having a total tantrum. In the end, I have to do it, of course, but I have to also voice out my disagreement with the requests that the institutions have. So I'm very grateful that Greber also wrote about this. But anyhow, I got this email and I thought it was something related to my master thesis, something that I had to fill online. And at the time, my partner that I was living with, he spoke Slovene and he understood Slovene. And I was just like, I was about to delete the email. And I was just like, can you come and read this and just tell me what they want? I was so annoyed. And he just looked at the email and he was like, you got the position, like for this PhD position. We both applied for it, but I got it. And I was like, what? No way. Like, you're lying. There's something wrong with it. And I was like copying it and Google translating it. And I was like, oh my God, I got the position. It was a really funny moment. But anyhow, yeah. So like, I'm in that sense fortunate that I didn't participate in this form of arranging in advance something, which I think many people do that in the universities here, and it's I don't think it's fair to the other candidates, but that is the state of affairs, unfortunately. And I think I addressed that in the short reflection that I had on my Patreon. And at the same time, I think there is another level, of course, of nepotism and corruption, and that is when you're getting a position, you're hoping that you're gonna get it. So that's why you're doing all of these things that are going to lead to other senior colleagues just attaching their names to the work that you did. In that sense, I'm also fortunate because my mentor doesn't do that. He doesn't exploit me. He doesn't ask me to do the work for him. That is his work. Meanwhile, I have colleagues who are doing the work of their mentors. because they see them as like free labor, free extra labor. And then, you come to finishing a third year of your PhD and you haven't done any work for your PhD because you are constantly barraged and asked to do someone else's work. And not only your mentors, like even I know examples of colleagues in a research center of a colleague of mine who is asked by his colleagues to constantly do work for them. And he just sees it as like, it is what it is. You just have to do it. And, I refuse to take part in it in any way. Even if I was in a position where my mentor would be pushing me to do that, I would be resisting. I would just say, look, then you can just find another candidate, just simply because I don't want to take part in enabling and strengthening the system of exploitation that already exists. So yeah, that's my reflection. I will put some books in the description box downstairs. If you have any thoughts, comments about the book or the reflection that I had about academia, yeah, you're free, share your thoughts, and let's continue the discussion. Thank you for listening to my rant, and see you in the next video. Bye.